Okay, welcome everyone to this public meeting for the Township of Puslinch on April 13th, 2022 at 7:01 p.m. We'll start with roll call. Councillor Spoulos.
Present.
Councillor Bailey.
Present.
Councillor Balmer.
Present.
And Councillor Goyda.
Present.
Purpose of this public meeting is to inform and provide the public with the opportunity to ask questions or to express views with respect to development proposals. The councilors are here to observe and listen to your comments. However, they will not make any decisions this evening. Township requests that you please notify by email planning@puslinch.ca or by phone at 519-763-1226 extension 4 if you wish to be on record and would like to be notified of future hearings and decisions regarding these applications. Please note the meeting is video and audio recorded and all electronic meetings are uploaded to the municipality's YouTube page. By registering to participate in the meeting by electronic means, you are consenting to have your likeness and comments recorded and posted on YouTube. As the chair, I am informing you that when council makes a decision, should you disagree with that decision, the Planning Act provides you with an opportunity to appeal this application to the Ontario Land Tribunal for a hearing. Please note that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or written submissions to the Township of Puslinch before the decision is made, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Township of Puslinch to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, if a person or public body does not make an oral submission at a public meeting or make written comments to the Township of Puslinch before the decision is made, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. You may wish to talk to Township staff regarding further information on the appeal process. The Planning Act requires that at least one public meeting be held for each development proposal. The format of this public meeting is as follows. The applicant or agent will present the purpose and detail of the application and any further relevant information. Following this, the public can obtain clarification, ask questions, and express their views on the proposal. Members of the public are permitted 10 minutes each to ask questions and express their views. This time limit is imposed to provide each member of the public an opportunity to speak. Council will then have the opportunity to ask any clarification questions. The applicant and the county planning staff will attempt to answer questions or respond to concerns this evening. If this is not possible, the applicant and or staff will follow up and obtain this information. Responses will be provided when this matter is brought forward and evaluated by council at a later date. So our first one is specific proposal number 1. This is a public meeting, involves an application by Lisa and Abigail Slater, and it's rezoning application D14 SLA, and it's to amend the Township of Puslinch Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 23-2018 from agricultural A zone to site-specific agricultural A to permit 3 existing residential dwellings. So would the clerk, Courtney Hoyt Fox, please have the owner / applicant join the panelists to explain the proposal.
So, Mr. Chair, we have Mr. John Cox here, who I believe is the agent for the Slaters. And if he'd like, I can display the sketch that was provided on the screen for him.
That'd be great. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Cox.
Good evening. Thank you. Should I begin?
Yes, absolutely. Please.
Thank you. Mayor, members of council, staff, and any members of the public that may be participating. This application arises as a result of an application that was made for the entire subject parcel to sever a 2-acre lot from the parcel. And that application was made and came before the Wellington County Land Division Committee in September of 2021 and was given conditional approval. As part, and that lot shows in the bottom left corner of the sketch that you can see on the screen. As part of the process and and in terms of disclosing what was existing on the property, the 3 residential units that currently exist on the property were identified and shown on the sketch. And they are in the shaded portions on there, except for the one that is most toward the rear of the property, which is just a stone storage building. And I'll describe that a little bit more in a moment. Property is currently owned by Lisa and Abigail Slater, and it was acquired by their parents in approximately 1980. And it was around that time that the changes that are subject to this application were actually made to the property. The main house is the top one in terms of what you're looking at in terms of the sketch. And it is a stone farmhouse that was built in approximately 1868, and it is currently occupied by Lisa Slater. In 1980, a building permit was issued by the township for a small 1,000 square foot bungalow secondary residence. That is the one that is closest to Arco Road on the, again, the sketch that is before you. And that was, there's no, we have the building permit information that was submitted as part of our zoning amendment application. There's no indication of anything further in terms of purpose for that. Mrs. Slater recalls that being occupied by a caretaker for the property at one point in time, but it is now occupied by a long-term tenant. The other building, which is referred to as the coach house, is then the other one in the sort of rear corner of the property at the end of the driveway access that you can see. And this was formerly a stable building, and it was renovated in 1982, again, based on a permit that was issued by the township, and which referenced it as a farm management office. And that renovation at the time, I am advised by the owners, was included residential space within the building. It was often there after occupied by staff or students from the University of Guelph, and currently, in fact, is long-term rented to a University of Guelph PhD student. So this application, in terms of a quick summary, is basically to recognize a situation that has existed on the property for approximately 40 years. I also want to note that both the main house and the coach house are, as well as the existing stone storage building on the property, are noted in the Township of Puslin's Municipal Register of Heritage Properties, which I understand was approved by council in December of 2021. And the intent of the owners is to maintain these historic buildings, and obviously the approval of the applications to allow these buildings to continue on the property will facilitate them in doing so. I won't spend a lot of time dwelling on the policy framework. I think you have that before you in the staff report that was prepared by county planning staff. But certainly, as a brief comment, I will note that provincial policy and as well as the county official plan policies are certainly moving towards being more flexible, and have moved towards being more flexible with respect to additional residential units. The county OP was updated through OPA 112 in that regard, and the township has also been considering, and is further considering it later in tonight's meeting, I understand, further provisions or revisions to the bylaw that will provide clarity on the situation where accessory additional residential units can be permitted on the properties. I reviewed those policies in preparation for tonight's meeting, and I would note that generally this application is consistent with these applications. And by that, I mean that there are 2 additional units that would be approved if the zoning amendment is approved. They are all accessed, as you can see from the sketch in front of you, by the same driveway, and are within the same building cluster, all around that that driveway and where the buildings are located on the property. They are a slightly greater distance from the main dwelling unit than what is contemplated in the revisions to the zoning bylaw that are underway, but which I believe is 40 meters, and these are, I believe, something like 47 and 52 or something like that. So only slightly more, a greater distance. And again, I would note that this is an existing situation that arises with these units. My last comment would be, and this is part of what is noted in the staff planning report, is that there have been no agency concerns registered with respect to the proposed applications. And we did have a planning advisory meeting a little over a month ago, and at that time there were no concerns raised from the public about the application. I don't know if we will have any input at tonight's meeting, but those are my comments, and I will obviously available to answer any questions that council may have. I believe Mrs. Slater was going to register for this meeting as well, and if I, for any reason, can't handle any questions that are directed to me, she may be able to help with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cox. Are there any persons who have questions, require further clarification or information, or wish to present their views on the proposal? Ms. White Fox.
Any attendees wish to make a comment, if you can use the raise your hand feature that's just located at the bottom of the screen. And Mr. Chair, I do notice that we have one call-in listener, so in a moment I'll just unmute them, and if they wish to make a comment, they can do so. If not, you can just stay silent. That's to the call-in listener. Last four digits of the phone number are 1768. So phone in listener 1768, I'm just going to give you permission to speak. If you don't wish to make a comment, you can just simply say stay silent. Mr. Chair, I don't see any hands being raised, and I don't see the call-in listener looking to speak.
Okay. Does council have any clarification questions regarding this application? Is there further information which the applicant wishes to provide?
No, I think we've summarized the application adequately. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Have a great evening. All right. So Ms. White Fox, just let me know when we're ready to go on to proposal number 2.
Yes, anytime, Mr. Chair.
Okay, this public meeting involves a township initiated application. It's a zoning bylaw amendment D14 ARU. The township has undertaken a review of the existing zoning provisions related to accessory apartments. The proposed amendments is to update the provisions for accessory apartments to bring the township zoning bylaws into conformity with the Planning Act, the County of Wellington official plan, and best practices for additional residential units, which are known as ARUs. This is a township initiated amendment that affects all lands in the township of Puslinch. And I believe, is it Megan and Joanna that are going to present this?
For you, Mr. Mayor, it's myself that will be presenting this application.
Thank you.
Okay, just bear with me here while I share my screen. Perfect. So thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. The township has initiated a zoning bylaw amendment to update the bylaws requirements regarding additional residential units. And the purpose of this amendment is to bring the bylaw into conformity with the County of Wellington official plan policies, while also considering the local context of the community and then best practices that are applied in other communities. In tonight's public meeting, we'll be providing an overview of the changes that are being proposed within the zoning bylaw regarding additional residential units. And we're also looking to obtain feedback from the public and council on these proposed changes. We'll be providing some background information and a quick overview of the current zoning bylaw provisions. And we'll also be providing some detail of the next step for this application and provide information on how the public can get further involved in this process. In 2019, the Planning Act was amended through Bill 108, More Homes, More Choice Act, to require municipalities to authorize the use of additional residential units within their official plans. The purpose of these changes is ultimately to support alternative housing options and also rental opportunities within Ontario. In 2020, the County of Wellington adopted Official Plan Amendment 112 to implement Planning Act changes for additional residential units. These policies provide direction to local municipalities when they're updating their zoning bylaws for additional residential units. And the official plan identifies matters that must be addressed and other matters that should be considered by municipalities when they're updating their bylaws. The County of Wellington official plan authorizes the use of one additional residential unit within a single detached, semi-detached, or row house dwelling, and one additional residential unit within an ancillary building to a single detached dwelling, semi-detached dwelling, or a row house dwelling. The county official plan also allows additional residential units to occupy the entirety of an ancillary building. In terms of public engagement, there is a resident survey that was launched on the Engage Puslinch website, and this survey is an opportunity for the public to get involved and provide feedback on additional residential units within the township. And then we're also here tonight for the public meeting for this application to obtain feedback from council and the public regarding the proposed changes to the bylaw. So what is an additional residential unit? You may have heard different terms for these units. So things like an accessory apartment or basement apartment, secondary suites, or in-law suites. And they are a self-contained residential unit, and they contain a separate kitchen, bathroom, and sleeping facilities. These units are subordinate in scale and function to the main dwelling. And we've prepared some images just to describe what the additional residential units we're referring to, different combinations of what they could look like. And we've used a single detached dwelling as an example in these images. So on the most left image, you can see additional residential units within and attached. So in the basement, within an addition, or partially within the second story. And in the second set of images on the right, you can see these additional residential units within an ancillary building, occupying the entire building or within the building. So I have the current provisions within the zoning bylaw on the screen, and the bylaw currently refers to these units as accessory apartments. These accessory apartments are permitted as of right within a number of different zones in the bylaw. And notably, only one accessory apartment is currently permitted. Within the agricultural zone, there are accessory apartments that are permitted to be within a detached building. And planning staff are proposing to delete this section in its entirety and replace it with provisions specifically for additional residential units to be in conformity with the official plan requirements, to take into account the local context of the township, and also include some best practices from other communities. So in terms of changes that are being proposed to the bylaw, the first change is replacing the definition for an accessory apartment with two different definitions, one for an additional residential unit that's attached to the principal dwelling and one for where the unit is detached. We're also proposing to adjust the term accessory apartment within different sections of the bylaw that's currently mentioning accessory apartments. So this includes items like short-term accommodations, all zones where an accessory apartment is a permitted use, and then also the parking section. In terms of how we're looking to modify that section 4.2, we're looking to delete it in its entirety and replace it with general provisions that would relate to all additional residential units, and then providing specific provisions for the different circumstances of having the additional residential unit within or attached to the principal dwelling or within an ancillary building. So in terms of general provisions that would apply to all units, we're proposing that 2 additional residential units are permitted per lot, which is allowed to have a single detached, semi-detached, or townhouse dwelling. We're also proposing a size cap for these units at 40% of the principal dwelling up to 130 square meters, that the height shall not exceed that of the principal dwelling, limits on driveway access so that the units share an entrance onto the street, servicing requirements to make sure there's adequate water and sanitary servicing on a property for these units, and then also provisions that meet the Ontario Building Code, Ontario Fire Code, minimum distance separation formula requirements, and then prohibiting these units within hazardous lands and also prohibiting them within bed and breakfasts. In terms of specific provisions related to when these units are attached to a principal dwelling, this would include situations where the principal single detached dwelling, semi-detached, or townhouse dwelling have the unit within it. And with those pictures on the right, that would be the first two images where the unit is in the basement or partially taking a part of the second story, or when someone is proposing an addition for an additional residential unit, as in the last picture on the slide. If an addition is proposed, the addition can be to the side or behind the principal dwelling and will need to meet the setback requirements of the zone in which that use is located. We're also proposing separate private entrances for these units, and also to allow these additional residential units to form the entirety of a basement if it is within the principal dwelling, which would be that top image on the slide. In terms of changes for when these units are detached, which would include situations where the additional residential unit is part of a building or occupies the entirety of the building. And you can see the first two examples are where the unit is occupying a part of the building, and the last one is the unit occupying the entire building. And we're proposing that the unit has to be on the same lot as the principal dwelling. The unit cannot be severed from the principal dwelling. Setbacks are identified within the zone in which the use is located. And we're also proposing requirements for these units to be within the building cluster and within 40 meters of the principal dwelling. We are also proposing additional height restrictions. So when the unit occupies the entirety of the building, we're proposing that the tiny homes can only be 5 meters in height. And then when in a circumstance where a unit is on the second story of an ancillary building, such as in that first image on the screen, the height shall be up to 8 meters. All other provisions of the applicable accessory buildings and structures would apply to these. And we're also proposing to prohibit garden suites on the same lot as having a detached additional residential unit. In terms of next steps for this application, we are obtaining public and council feedback on the proposed changes. We also have the survey that will be up at the end of the month. And then we're also going to review all of the comments that have been received and address any outstanding items and adjust provisions where appropriate. And then finally, we will provide a planning recommendation report and draft amending bylaw for consideration. And that concludes my presentation, and myself and Megan Ferris are present to answer any questions.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any persons who have questions that require further clarification or information or wish to present their views on the proposal? If Ms. White Fox could coordinate that, please.
Any of the attendees wish to make a comment or ask a question, if you could just use the raise your hand feature just located at the bottom of your screen. Mr. Chair, we have one hand being raised right now.
Okay, you want to move Ms. Chartrand over, please?
And if you could just state your name and your address for the record as well.
Ashley Chartrand, 90 Gilmore Road, Westland, Ontario.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi,
How's it going?
good, how are you?
Good, good. You have a question?
I do. So does this mean that the accessory dwelling can only be 40% of the main dwelling that is on the lot? Is that set in stone, or could that be made bigger? Because that's still pretty small unless you have a fairly big house to begin with.
Thanks for your question, Ashley, through the mayor. The size restriction is there to ensure that the units are subordinate to the main dwelling, but we do understand there may be circumstances in which a unit may be larger, and there are different methods in terms of addressing that, in terms of applying for minor variance. But in terms of the size restriction, we're really looking to make sure they are subordinate. So it's 40% and then up to a maximum size of 115 square meters is the proposed wording currently.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
If there's any other attendees looking to make a comment, if you can just use the raise your hand feature, and then I will go to the one call-in listener to see if there's a comment. All right, the call-in listener with the last four digits, 1768. I'm just giving you permissions to speak. If you have a comment, please go ahead. If not, you can just remain silent.
All right.
Oh, we have Ms. Shartland raising her hand one more time.
Hi there. Sorry for that. So we just calculated and it's 1,237.85 square feet. And is that just for one floor? Can you have two floors?
Sorry, Ashley, can I just clarify your question? So you mean, can the unit be 2 floors?
Yes.
Yeah, so the policies have provisions for the units being within, as there are requirements for things like height that would limit what the unit would look like. So you'd be looking to meet all those different provisions, whether you spread them over 2 floors and whether they have an aspect related to the main house or occupy the entirety of the building. If you're looking for the unit to occupy the entirety of a building, so not have a garage or something related to the main house, there is a height limit of 5 meters that we're currently proposing for these units. So you may have some difficulty in terms of having a detached unit being that height. If that's what you're thinking, there'd be all these different components that you'd be looking to meet if you were applying for an additional residential unit. So you'd have that size restriction, and then also the height and setbacks and all that other thing, all those other things that go along with preparing one of these units.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Oh, there's another hand up there, Ms. White Fox.
Yes.
Hello,
Hello,
can you hear me?
you sure can.
Hi there.
How you doing?
Thank you. Thank you for letting me attend this meeting. I hope that everybody's well.
You as well.
I just wanted a clarification. So my name is Denise Knapp. I'm a resident of Puslinch, 7738 Maltby Road East. I'm really excited about this plan and this amendment. I think it would be really helpful for some residents in caring for elderly families and extended families. I just want to make sure I'm clear on what's being proposed. So what I'm hearing and what I'm understanding is that you can have your principal residence where you're living, and then another detached dwelling on the property that is 40% of the principal, no more than that. And then are you also saying that you can have an accessory apartment or ancillary apartment, which would be like something like in your basement, or would that also qualify for another building on the property? Like, you know how some people are doing barn dominiums or things like that. Are those things that qualify, or I just want to make sure I'm clear on what's being outlined here.
Through the mayor, what's being proposed is having one unit within a detached building. So that unit can either occupy a part of the building or the entirety of the building is the proposal. And you could also have a unit within the principal dwelling as long as it's one of those 3 dwelling types. So either single, the detached dwelling, a townhouse dwelling, or within a semi-detached dwelling. So you have those 3. So as long as it's within that, the principal dwelling would be, you could have a basement apartment, a part of that principal dwelling as well. So there's 2, one within the principal dwelling and then one within an ancillary building. And then the size restriction would apply to each of those units as well. And the definition for net floor area is what we're using in terms of the percentage. And then it's also up to a certain cap in size as well. Does that answer your question, Denise?
It does. And just to further get some clarification. What would that require? Would that require any sort of other zoning amendments or variances for people that were interested in doing something like that?
Yep, it's a good question. What we're proposing in the bylaws to have these provisions, so where the units are permitted, you could come in for a building permit for them. So they wouldn't require additional planning approvals unless you were going beyond what the provisions provide for. So as long as you're meeting the zoning bylaw requirements, you'd be looking to submit a building permit to construct one of these additional residential units.
Okay, thank you so much.
I have a question for staff, and it relates to Ms. Chartrand's question about square footage. In determining square footage, if we take the height maximum out of it, it's 1,300 square feet, 1,400 square feet per floor. So if you have a primary residence that has 2 stories and you can actually do 2 stories, it's 1,400 square feet combined. Or if you have a large single bungalow that you're not allowed to do a second story, it's the main floor, could be 1,400 square feet. Is that the intention?
Mr. Mayor, just so I can clarify your question, it's if, depending on the size of the main dwelling, what the size of the unit would be?
Basically what I'm asking is, are you including the basement in the square footage? Is it?
Yep, so we're using net floor area, and net floor area does exclude some items from it. So things like stairwells or elevators or those kinds of spaces. So it would exclude those, but we are looking to include the stories in terms of the calculation of what the floor area would be for the principal dwelling. So it'd be looking at any of the stories in between, removing those essentially non-habitable spaces, and it within the definition of net floor area, it explains which would be excluded.
So if I were to list my house for sale, they would not include the basement in the square footage. So would that be what we would be mirroring with this, with these ARUs?
My understanding is we would include the basement, but maybe Megan can jump in here.
Would? What, sorry, my internet cut out. Was it would or wouldn't?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Through the chairs to you to answer your question. So yeah, so we're using net floor area. Net floor area uses all stories. And as Joanne has mentioned, it excludes non-habitable spaces, but it doesn't exclude a basement. So it would technically include a basement provided it meets, I guess, a definition of a habitable room.
Okay.
So I would say generally, yes, you're going to be including the basement.
Okay, I would like more clarification at a later point on the habitable room and what meets that definition, please. Thank you. Ms. White Fox, I think I might have spurred a couple questions.
Yes, so we have Mrs. Chartrand and Ms. Knapp also with their hand up, so I'm not sure. Maybe Ms. Chartrand had her hand up first, so we'll enable her speaking.
Hi, sorry for all the questions, but they just keep coming up. So is it possible for the new unit to become the primary residence?
Through the chair, in terms of the zoning bylaw, we are not limiting that as a possibility as long as the unit would meet the requirements of the bylaw, but it would ultimately be implemented through a staff approach of whether the conversion of the main dwelling could become an additional residential unit.
So could the new dwelling become the primary is what I'm asking, and then the original main be 40% of that? So
sorry, Ashley, you're asking that the existing dwelling would become the additional, or would become the unit, and then you'd build a new dwelling?
Yes, and then so we're trying to build a bigger building than what is proposed right now because it just is a bit small. So is it possible to have the main house right now be the accessory and then it become 40% of the new one? So the new one could be bigger and then the main or the accessory building is 40% of that one. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just through the chair, Ashley, I can maybe add to that. So
Okay.
yeah, so as Joanne has mentioned, like we're not going to limit what we would refer to as like a conversion. There would need to be an internal process that's established because you ultimately can't technically have two dwellings on one property. So there'd need to be a process to establish like some sort of agreement to say, you know, or some sort of permitting process to say that this is going to become your ARU and then your new dwelling is going to become your primary dwelling. But whatever version or whatever dwelling is going to be the ARU, it needs to meet what all of the zoning provisions. So if if your house, like say if you meet, so if your current house is like 45% and it's over the 130 square meters, your current house, which would then be converted to the ARU, wouldn't meet the ARU provision. So you'd be looking for relief from the bylaw. So you'd have to be cognizant of that. And I would just add for everyone that's listening, actually, we've done a research of a variety of communities within Ontario, not everyone obviously, but a healthy review of the size cap. And the size cap that the township has is like something that exists already, but 130 square meters is larger than what we've seen in most communities. To be honest, the average is about 100 square meters. So it's quite large already. Just to add that context.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hello, Denise.
Hi there. Thank you. Thank you,
You're
Mayor Seeley. Sorry, first time at this. So I just had a question around, are there any regulations that you're thinking of where the buildings would need to have a certain measure of meters or whatever spaced apart? How far and how close would these buildings need to be?
Yeah, it's a good question. And through the mayor, we're proposing that the units, when they're in a detached structure, remain within the cluster. And then we've also included a specific distance, and I believe it's 40 meters. Let me just confirm here. Yeah, so it's what we're proposing is the additional residential unit shall be within the existing building cluster and located within 40 meters of the principal dwelling on the lot. So you'd be looking for the unit to be within 40 meters and remaining within the cluster of where all the buildings are located on the property.
Okay, I understand that. That's reasonable. And I just had one more question. I know this is a process and it takes time. What are you thinking that the timeline might be for this to potentially be approved?
Yeah, it's a good question. So where we are right now is in collecting feedback from the public and then also from council. Then we also have that survey that's been posted, which will be up until the end of the month. So we are waiting to see what kind of feedback we get from those different groups, and then we'll be reviewing all that information and then coming back to council with a final recommendation report and bylaw for consideration. So in terms of timeline, I'm not sure if we have a concrete date yet in terms of looking at all that feedback and then preparing a response, but we're all looking to come back in a timely manner.
Okay, and that's the best you can do. I understand things take a little longer in today's world in general. So thank you for answering my questions.
Further to the cluster comment, is it corner to corner, like nearest corner to corner? Is it center to center, or is it, you know, furthest point to furthest point? Have you hashed that out yet?
I'm smiling because that's such a good detailed question. And I think at this point in time, like we didn't get into an idea of like how exactly it would be measured. That could be something that maybe we spell it out. We haven't seen a lot of communities do that, but at the same time, it could be something kind of reviewed internally by township staff. But I think at the end of the day, we're not intending to nickel and dime with like distances. They're trying to be reasonable with it as well. But it's a really good question. It just, it's very detailed.
All right, well, thank you. Is there any further questions from the attendees? No. Does council have any clarification questions regarding this application?
I do.
Go ahead, Councilor Bowman, sorry.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate, I'd like to thank the residents. I thought it's great to hear how engaged people are in this, and the order of operations questions are always very important to me. And I'm glad staff are on top of those, and I'm glad the residents are already thinking about those. So that's great. The one question that I wanted to ask about was related to the accessory residential units that would be put on as an addition. I heard you state that they had to be on the side or the rear of the existing house. And I would understand that on a house on a 1 acre lot, which is at the minimum setback from the road perhaps. But there's a lot of properties where the houses are 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 or 400 meters from the road. And determining which is the front is maybe is difficult. I mean, my front door is facing away from the road. Some farmhouses have the front door facing parallel to the road. What is the purpose of this? Could it be adjusted for houses that are further back? And does it really matter if the house is further back? I'm trying to get a sense of why it can't be the front of the house.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the intent of that provision, it's to ensure that when there is an addition for these units, it's visually appealing. So it doesn't disrupt the way that the building currently looks, and it's the same, or it looks the same from the street in terms of it being the same unit of whether it's one of those 3 housing types. So it's meant to put the use to the side or to the back, so not disrupting the way the unit interacts with the street. I take your point on larger agricultural lots. You wouldn't be able to necessarily see the building from the road, but the intent is in situations where it interacts with the street to keep the unit back and to keep it visually appealing and matching what's currently located on the street. So it is something that we can take a look at in terms of other requirements. I know when we did our research into how other municipalities were looking at these units, that was a consistent approach, was having the units either to the side or back to maintain the same interaction from the street.
Thank you. And I completely understand that in a house that is visible from the road or close to the road. I just think of even my own situation, it's the old log portion that's on at the road end of the house. And if I was going to put an addition on, I'd love to put it on that to block it from the wind. And you can't see it from the road anyway. And my neighbor's place is half a kilometer from the road. So if we could consider that as a sort of a variation and make it based on setbacks and visibility from the road, perhaps that would be a way to address that concern. I'd love to see something about that. So thank you.
Further to that, if somebody were to apply for it at the front of their home with less setback, I'd like to hear from the planners to know if they would feel that that's a minor variance type approach, because maybe we could deal with that on a per application issue, right? Because I get the impact on the neighbors. If it's in behind and it doesn't change the aesthetics of the home, there's going to be less concern and complaints. But ultimately, we have a housing crisis that everybody's talking about. And if the room that you have is at the front of your property, and let's face it, probably most of these are going to be quite aesthetically pleasing, then if it's just a minor variance process, that's great. But if it's something else, then that could be problematic. But I'd like to see what your thoughts are on that. Is there any other? Oh, go ahead, Joanna.
Oh, I was just going to say, in terms of if it is going through the variance process, then we would just be looking at whether it meets those 4 tests of minor variance. So looking, depending on what it would look like on the front in terms of how close it would be to the street, how it would interact with the street and the surrounding neighborhood. Those would be the kind of things we'd be looking into in terms of whether it's minor or not in those situations. And if it's not to the back or to the side of the building. The official plan talks about having the units also be subordinate too. So I would just add, that's also what we're trying to accomplish in terms of making these units look subordinate to the main dwelling as well. So I think we'd be weighing all those different parts of it in terms of the variance if someone was to proceed with that.
Any other questions or comments from council? Councillor Bailey?
One thing I haven't heard anything about, and maybe this is getting detailed, but are there any parameters as to the type of building that the ancillary building can be? Like, can it be a modular home? Does it have to be, solid foundation? Are there guidelines around that?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we have included a just clarification within the definition of the units that for the purpose of those detached units, that the ancillary portion of it means a shed, private garage, carriage house, or a barn. So it's relating those detached units to those particular types of buildings. But I appreciate what you're saying in terms of what the actual type of building in terms of foundation and those detailed components of it. We are, with that definition, trying to show what kind of buildings would be considered essentially for these units.
Okay.
So Councillor Bailey, are you talking about tiny homes and I don't know, some of the other things that are floating around out there? Is that what you were referencing?
Yeah. Because I'm just picturing, the ease of bringing in modular, plunking a modular thing down, and then we've got a whole township full of modular homes that can come with some situations. But I didn't know if there was any sort of regulation around what we would consider it to be. But it sounds like it's going to be within a building that's currently existing.
And maybe to the chair, if you don't mind, I'll just add on to what Joanna said. So Councillor Bailey's raised a good question, and it's also a part of the comments that we've heard from PDAC as well, because we were there yesterday evening. But it's something to consider, because I think the reality is, like, we don't explicitly say the type of building under the building code per se. Like, we're talking about definitions under a bylaw, but it needs to be permanent. So it couldn't be like, we're not envisioning because we use the term tiny home pretty interchangeably with like those kind of like something on wheels and it has like a compostable toilet. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something permanent year round. And it ultimately, we have to assure that there's like a distinction between like a permanent dwelling type versus like a garden suite, because we're essentially saying there's a distinction between the two. So it's, I hope that provides some clarity.
So it won't be RV trailers parked in the backyard,
No.
hooked up to something. It's going to be a more permanent structures.
No, that's not what's being contemplated.
Okay. Anything further, Councillor Bailey?
No, that's great. Thank you.
So, anything further from council? Well, I believe we're on to proposal number 3, correct, Ms. Fox?
Yes, on to number 3.
All right. Actually, did Denise Knapp mention her address when she spoke?
Yes, I believe she
Okay,
did.
good. Okay, perfect. All right, so on to number 3. This public portion of this public meeting involves an application for the Lancy Pit expansion. It's rezoning application D14/CVM. And it's to amend the County of Wellington official plan to add the subject property to the mineral aggregate resource overlay to facilitate the expansion of an existing gravel pit, CDM Lancy Pit. A portion of the lands is proposed to be redesignated from greenlands to secondary agricultural and from secondary agricultural to greenlands on Schedule A of the County of Wellington official plan. The zoning bylaw amendment proposes to amend the Township of Pustinich new comprehensive zoning bylaw 23-2018 to rezone a portion of the lands from the agricultural SP1 zone to extractive EXI zone to facilitate expansion of an existing pit, CBM Lancy pit. Is there somebody here to present that, Ms. Hoy Fox?
Yes, Mr. De Ruyter is here with us. I'll just move him over.
Good evening, Mayor Seeley, members of council. My name is Neil De Ruyter. I'm a planner with MHBC Planning. I'm here on behalf of CBM Aggregates. And with me as well at the meeting is David Hanratty and Stephen May from CBM, as well as my colleague Dawson McKenzie from MHBC. So first, thank you for the opportunity to address council. I heard Mayor Seeley's comments at the beginning about being back in the horseshoe. We too wish we were back so that we could speak sort of in person about this, but we will do our best with the presentation we provided, and we hope we can give you a helpful summary of the this application. Next slide, please, Courtney. In terms of a brief overview, CBM's applied for an application to permit an expansion of their Lancy pit. On the map included on this slide, the Lancy pit is outlined in yellow, and the lands in red to the south of the Lancy pit are what are being applied for an expansion of the pit. In terms of the applications, there were 3 concurrent applications submitted. The first is a license application under the Aggregate Resources Act. The second is a zoning bylaw amendment, and the third is a county official plan amendment. The applications were submitted in May 2020, and they've been reviewed for the last couple of years. One thing I would like to note for council's attention is that in the County of Wellington, an official plan amendment is required as of right for any new pits or quarries. So there's nothing sort of specific or particular about this site. That is a common requirement based on the county official plan policies. In terms of the proposal, it's a proposal to extract below the water table. The licensed area of the pit is about 15 hectares, and the extraction area is about 10 hectares in size. Next slide, please. A little bit about this location. There's approximately 3 to 4 million tons of high quality sand and gravel resources available from this site. The aggregate from this site will be used to produce high quality materials, including asphalt and concrete grade stone, as well as crushed stone and granular materials. This site is identified as a significant aggregate resource area, both in provincial and county mapping. The figure that we have up on this slide is the county's official plan mapping of aggregate resources of primary and secondary significance. As well, in terms of the site, there are limited sensitive uses in close proximity to this site. There are licensed pits immediately to the west, north, and east of this site. Next slide, please. A little bit about the proposed operation. This is an operation that we refer to as a feeder pit. And what that essentially means is that materials are extracted from the site using excavators and dragline, loaded onto trucks, and then hauled to the Aberfoyle South Pit for processing. And the Aberfoyle South Pit's on the north side of Concession 2. It's a little bit difficult to see on this map, but the area in the pink hatching, that shows where the current processing plant area is. So what that means is that materials are essentially hauled onto trucks, they cross Concession 2, and then they're processed at that plant. There's no on-site processing, washing, or crushing that would occur on the Lancy Pit expansion lands. All of that activity would occur at the existing plant in the Aberfoyle South Pit. As part of this proposal, there's no trucks onto Side Road 25. Side Road 25 will not be used for access to the site. On this figure here, you can see it's a thin black dotted line which shows the internal access to the site. So the existing access at Concession 2 would be used to access the expansion lands. The tonnage condition and the hours of operation for this site will be the same as the existing pit. So that is a maximum annual tonnage condition of 1 million tons. What I would note is CBM anticipates operating this site for approximately 5 to 10 years, depending on market demand. The hours of operation will be the same as the Lancy pit, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. daily. Next slide, please. A little bit about the proposed rehabilitation. About 40% of the site will become water. And in terms of water, I mean the created landform in terms of a pond, as well as shoreline wetlands along the edge of the pond. I think the couple things that we really want to highlight that we've really focused and CBM's paid attention to on this site is trying to find a way to create a landform that's more diverse than what you would maybe normally or expect to see with a square edge pond. And this is what we've really been focusing on. The other components of the rehabilitation include about 1.3 hectares of new deciduous and coniferous plantings. And this would occur adjacent to the significant woodland to the south, which will be protected from extraction. And the planting will occur on a north-facing slope. In terms of the plantings, that's been looked at extensively in consultation with the township's ecologist, both in terms of the amount of area planted, where it's going to occur, as well as the species mix, the monitoring requirements, and the maintenance requirements. We'd also note that there's potential through the rehabilitated landform for 3 new residences alongside Road 25. Currently, this site, which is comprised of 3 properties, contains 2 houses. And after extraction is completed, there could potentially be an opportunity to have a new house on each of the 3 lots. And Courtney, if you can flip to the next slide, I can show you with a visual what we mean on that. So this is a conceptual after-use plan intended to very high level show what could occur on this site post-extraction. And what we've shown is 3 houses on each of the 3 lots, as well as a rough sort of outline of the pond area. As you can see, the shape is a bit of a panhandle. The pond area is relatively limited to the overall site. As we said before, it's about 40% of the total site. The wooded area on the south end of the site will remain protected, and the tree plantings will occur just south of the proposed pond. So I think for council's information, what CBM's really trying to focus on with this is not looking at creating a landform that's just a water lot or simply environmental features. There's a recognition for the township as to what can occur with these properties after extraction's done. And I think with creating landforms like this, there'd be an ability to allow for after uses, and whether in this case it's residential or other uses, I think what we're intending to show is that there are opportunities beyond simply extraction and creating a water feature. Next slide, please. In terms of the official plan amendment, and I give Mayor Seeley credit because it was a tongue twister explaining the amendment here, but essentially what is being applied for is we are adding the mineral aggregate area, which is an overlay on the county official plan schedule, to the lands that are currently designated secondary agriculture. And the lands that are designated secondary agriculture on the map on this slide are in the orangish brown hue. And the other components of the amendment is there's a slight tweak on the limit of the Greenlands designation, which is the green area to the south. And that's as a result of verifying the limits of the significant woodland boundary, which occurred on site with the township's ecologist. At the end of the day, the Greenlands area will increase in size by a little amount to reflect the actual limit of the woodland boundary. The other part of the official plan amendment is to extend the sand and gravel resource overlay to the southern limit of the extraction area. Currently, there's about 2 hectares of the site that are not within that resource overlay. So to clean it up to ensure it reflects the extraction area, that will be extended to the southern limit of the extraction area. The other component is the lands would remain designated secondary agriculture. As a result of the mineral aggregate being an overlay designation, the secondary agricultural designation would remain in place, even if this official plan amendment were to be approved. Next slide, please. Turning to the zoning bylaw amendment, the application is essentially to rezone from an agricultural zone to an extractive zone. The area that's shown in the black hatching, that's what's proposed to be rezoned to extractive. There would be no changes to the significant woodland, which is shown in the green overlay south of the extraction area. That would remain zoned agricultural and protected from extraction. One thing I'd like to note, just in the county planning report that was included in the public meeting agenda, there is discussion about considering specific items in the bylaw in terms of scoping, permitted uses, et cetera. And certainly CBM would be more than willing to work with both the township and county on that matter. Next slide, please. In terms of the application studies that have been submitted with this application, there was a planning report and summary statement under the Aggregate Resources Act. This essentially assessed the proposal with respect to county official plan policies, provincial policy statement policies, growth plan, as well as other land use matters. The second is a natural environment report, which looked at all the natural features on the site and adjacent to the site. What I would note for the natural environment report in terms of some of the key findings is that the significant woodland will remain protected from extraction. There will be a 5-meter setback from the drip line. That was reviewed with the township's ecologist, as well as the GRCA and Ministry of Natural Resources. In terms of natural features on the site, the site's mostly a Scott pine plantation. There are, however, some rock structures which contain some bat habitat. As a result of that, CBM's proceeding to obtain a permit under the Endangered Species Act, and we anticipate to see approval on that process shortly. With respect to the hydrogeological assessment, this assessed impacts on water quality and quantity as a result of extraction, both occurring below the water table, as well as the creation of a final pond. What was included was there were 4 monitoring wells drilled on the site. There's also extensive monitoring data available from this area. I'm sure as a council you received the monitoring reports, and there's quite an extensive amount of information within this area. That was all taken a look at and assessed with respect to the addition of specifically a 6-hectare pond and how that would impact the water table and water well users. With respect to the recommendations on that, monitoring will be ongoing throughout extraction. A door-to-door well survey will be completed prior to extraction. And I would note on that the hydrogeology report has been extensively looked at by the township's hydrogeologist, as well as Ministry of Environment and the GRCA hydrogeologists. An archaeological assessment's also been prepared with the application. There were no findings on the site, and a clearance letter has been obtained from the Ministry of Culture. The other is a noise study, which recommends that berms be constructed as the site progresses, and the berms are essentially placed adjacent to a vacant lot alongside Road 25, as well as alongside Road 25. There's also certain recommendations with respect to the equipment operating on site to ensure that it meets the noise guidelines. And finally, all of this information is tied together on what we call the Aggregate Resources Act site plan. This essentially outlines how the site's operated, how it's rehabilitated, and then the technical requirements that CBM is required to follow. The application has been reviewed by Ministry of Natural Resources, Ministry of Environment, and I would say for Ministry of Environment, it was both from a groundwater, surface water, as well as species at risk perspective. OMAFRA's also looked at the application, Ministry of Culture, GRCA, Wellington Source Water Protection, as well as the township and county and their expert peer reviewers. And I'll just go quickly over the review process on these reviews. If Courtney can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of the technical reviews, we've listed here the agencies and expert peer review comments that have been addressed. There's been a lot of work undertaken with this collaboratively with the township, the county, and their peer reviewers on this. Since the application was submitted in May 2020, there's been a lot of time and effort put into responding to agency comments. We're pleased to see that the technical comments and concerns, and specifically the peer reviewers that are retained on behalf of the township, that they are satisfied. A lot of work has gone into addressing that. And What I would certainly know for Township Council is that there have been substantial changes to the application as a result of that. And just very quickly listing a couple of them. The significant woodland limit's been expanded, which means that the extraction area has been slightly reduced from what was originally proposed, as well as there's certain noise requirements that have been agreed to with the township's noise consultant. And that includes things like doing an acoustic audit to ensure that the pit equipment, that the operating equipment is meeting sound level limits at nearby receptors, as well as I mentioned a door-to-door well survey prior to extraction occurring. There's also protective fencing that's required adjacent to the significant woodland. And as well, the discussion on the reforestation has been very detailed in terms of what species are planted, how the planting occurs, when it occurs, how it's monitored, and what maintenance is required. And that was done in conjunction with GRCA, Ministry of Natural Resources, as well as the township's ecologist. Next slide, please. Touching on consultation, as a result of applications under the Planning Act and the Aggregate Resources Act, there's been concurrent consultation that's occurred. I just want to highlight some of the pieces to just talk about the work that's being done with the community on this application and CBM's efforts. This application was presented to PDAC in October 2020, as well as their CBM has set up a project website. There's been neighborhood handouts that have gone out to the community, as well as direct mailings. There's been notices put in the newspaper, notice signs. There was an information session held a year ago. And importantly, what we wanted to put forward was that under the Aggregate Resource Act process, which allows members of the public and agencies to file objections, we did not receive any public objections during that period. I would also note that we were aware that there have been no comments received to date. I understand that there has been an updated, a new comment letter that's been recently provided to the township, but beyond that, it's our understanding that there have been no other formal comments received. I'd specifically highlight that there are a couple residences across the road from this pit expansion, and those houses are located next to what we call the CBM PQA pit. And those residences, to our understanding, have not provided any comments or objected to the application. I'd also highlight that there's been extensive Indigenous consultation that's occurred with the Six Nations, as well as Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that's been occurring since 2017, and there are no outstanding concerns from those communities. Next slide, please. So I'll just touch on some concluding remarks, some of the things that we would certainly like to highlight and put forward for council's information. First is that we view the rehabilitation that's being proposed as more than just a pond. CBM has certainly taken into account and is seriously considering comments that they're aware of from the township and others with respect to how lands are left once the resources are extracted, and finding a way to create something that produces more benefit for the township at the end of the day. And we think we're trying to find that balance through this proposal. And certainly what I would say for council's attention is that CBM is more than willing to work on that, to find a way to make it work so that the township feels confident that once CBM's extracted and rehabilitated the site, that there's other opportunities for the lands moving forward. There's, in terms of the natural features, as I mentioned, there's no extraction proposed within the significant natural features being the significant woodland. A setback has been established next to that, and there will be substantial tree planting that's will occur next to that significant woodland. Just on that point as well, what I would note is, given the expected timelines for operating this pit, that tree planting will occur relatively earlier in the process, given the overall lifespans. And once that pit slope is available for rehabilitation, the tree planting can occur. So this is not a prospect that we're talking, 20, 30 years from now. It is one in which the timing's been outlined so that it occurs once that side slope has been extracted. Next slide, please. As a result of maintaining the maximum annual tonnage of the Lancy pit, there will be no increase in the amount of truck traffic Certainly, it's extending the life of available high-quality reserves. But in terms of the magnitude that would have otherwise been experienced during the Landsea Pit operation, it's not increasing the overall amount of truck traffic. The site is not located within a prime agricultural area as mapped both in the provincial mapping as well as the county's official plan. As I noted, it's designated secondary agriculture, which distinguishes it from the prime agricultural designation in the county's official plan. There's also no agricultural uses on the property. As I said, the majority of the property right now is a pine plantation. There have been no public objections received through the Aggregate Resources Act consultation process. Certainly, you know, from our perspective, and you know, my perspective as a planner dealing primarily with aggregate applications, it's not very common to not receive any public objections, and not to say that there's no public concerns, but certainly it's a consideration, and one in which you know, it's helpful to know with respect to the overall sort of direct public perspective on the application next to the subject lands. There are no outstanding technical concerns regarding water quantity and quality, source water protection, environmental, and archaeology. Next slide, please. In closing, we want to thank council for the opportunity to present the application, and certainly we're more than happy to participate in this evening's meeting. And if there are any questions, whether it's from council or the public, we're more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Neil. Ms. Hoy Fox, are there any members from the public that wish to ask some questions to the presenter?
Yes, we have two hands being raised. I think Mr. McNee got his hand up first, so I'll just, Mr. McNee, if you could just state your name and your address when I enable the speaking.
Hello, are we recording?
Yes, we are.
And this is John McNee, 6927 Concession 2, Puslinch. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to add to my comments letter. Mr. Mayor, hope you're recovering nicely from that darn COVID. My letter was written in the belief that planning, whether land use or fiscal, county-wise or township-specific, relies on the good faith of all the community partners. Without that trust, the planning, no matter how well it's done, isn't worth the paper or the digital data it's written on. If you type CBM into the ERO, that's the Environmental Registration of Ontario Office search engine tonight, you'll find that in just the last month, 4 applications for site plan changes were received from CBM. In the municipality of Thames Centre for changes to extract below the water table. In the municipality of Kawartha Lakes to more than triple extracted tonnage. In the municipality of Whitby to change the air and noise thresholds for a concrete plant. And the same in Burlington. I would ask council to consider that, along with the specific issues raised in our letter, when making their decision on this rezoning application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McNee.
Mr. Chair, we also have Ms. White with her hand raised.
Hi.
Welcome, Kathy.
So my name is Kathy White. I live at 4540 Wellington Road 35 in Puslinch Township. I have typed what I want to say, but after listening to the presentation, I would like to say that during the time of the license public meeting, we were pretty busy with COVID, trying to get our shots, look after our families. I know I did take it out of the paper. I actually tore the date out of the paper and it passed by. So I think during these times, we can't assume that the public is not interested, but we are interested in many other things that are consuming our families right now, and they continue to. So this pit has not been top and center, although I will say that as background, I did attend the public meetings for the existing Lancy pit back in 2008 or 2009. So before I begin, I'd like to make a statement about the use of the term expansion. Under the Agri-Resources Act, Section 13.2.1, the boundaries of the area subject to a license, as specified in a site plan for the license, may not be expanded unless an application for a new license is made. This is a new license under the Agri-Resources Act, not an expansion. Although an expansion may be permitted under Section 13.2.2 of the Act, it does not apply here. The same is true for the applications to amend the official plan and for the zoning. And these are new planning applications. The County of Wellington Planning Report advises that for the municipal planning application, the applicant has submitted the site plans, which were prepared for the MND MNRF. In preparation for tonight's meeting, I first reviewed the site plans and site plan notes for the license application. And I say they're the license application. Of course, when making any planning decision based on site plans prepared for an aggregate license, we must always be cognizant of Section 13.1 of the Agri-Resources Act, that the minister may at any time add a condition to a license, rescind or vary a condition of a license, or amend a license in any other way. We are all familiar with Section 66 of the Agri-Resources Act. There's no requirement for a development permit under the Planning Act, and the additional restrictions that were placed on municipalities respecting any aspect of the operation of a pit. The license/site plans can be amended, and we only have to look next door at the University of Guelph pit to see numerous examples. And this is I'm sorry, I've written things in here. The recent zone change to extract adjacent to Creve Hill Center is justification for strongly recommending that the significant woodland on the south side of the pit be excluded from both the extractive zone and the overlay, not be within the license boundary. And I'm not sure if that was, I think that's what was said earlier, except there was some comment about having it within the overlay. I think if that woodland is going to be left out, it needs to be left out of everything, because we've seen this happen before. There are two variations from the operation standards on the site plans, which I was concerned about. OS 510-1, setbacks of 0 and 15 meters from the vacant lot per agreement with the private property owner. Has there been sufficient study to determine adverse impacts from the industrial operation of the pit and to protect future residents? Because that lot is zoned and it could be a residence. OS 19.1, below water table slopes of 2 to 1. This will increase extraction tonnage, but result in a very steep drop off into the lake. The majority, or about half of the subject lands, at least the lands proposed for the OPN zoning amendment, are not identified in the county's mineral aggregate resource area schedule. That's about half. Now, if that bottom section, that southern section, is eliminated, then it would be, the majority would be within the mineral aggregate schedule. I just wanted to make that clear, or to clarify that, or I need clarification for that. I reviewed the planning report prepared by the proponent prepared for the proponent by MHBC Planning. I've also read the County of Wellington Planning Report. I have some concerns. One of them is the 5 meters from the drip line of the trees. I've seen this in an application that I dealt with here. there's a statement on the site plan which acknowledges that compaction of soil in the setback area can negatively impact tree roots. So increasing the setbacks from the wooded area would be prudent. There is, I don't believe I've seen it to this extent before, habitat of endangered species on the site. The proponent justifies the removal of endangered species habitat by referring to what is currently available in the local landscape. So that means they can go somewhere else. So this is an unacceptable approach, lacks accountability, and proposes that endangered species find another location. Is this the intent of the growth plan, and is this consistent with PPS? Another point is the endangered species breeding on the site. So that's the eastern brown-footed Myotis bats. So they're actually, I believe, breeding, nesting there. There's habitat of the threatened species. There are no limits on the days of operation. There may be limits on the times, but the way that, that this proposal is written, that they could go 7 days a week, and that needs to be fixed. This may not be a prime agricultural area, but it is prime class 2 farmland. And we don't ever want to downplay that because we've lost so much of it forever. The proponents, the subject lines are also partially within the wellhead protection area Q, but the proponent's response is that the tier 3 study has not been incorporated into the GRCA source protection plan and therefore is not yet legally in effect. That's the acknowledgement or the statement by the proponent's planner that the Place to Grow 2019 will make it faster and easier to build housing. That's from the growth plan. The license, if approved, would demolish at least 2 homes in Puslinch Township and their properties. How does this conform with the growth plan? The proud neighbors who once lived along the 25th Side Road and Concession 2 are gone, as there are their homes and their properties. So why are we here? Is this good planning? Do these applications meet the test? So I'm going to quote the comments from Ontario Nature regarding the proposed changes to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe are as follows. It seems inconceivable that aggregate extraction would be permitted within the habitat of endangered species and threatened species in the regional natural heritage system. And that's what makes this proposal so different for me. I would also like clarification from the county planner on section 4.2.8 of the growth plan, mineral aggregate resources 2C. I want to know if the related decision is consistent with the PPS and what is meant by the related decision. Thank you for listening to me. I've been doing this for 20 years now. I'm tired, but I'm not stopping.
Thank you, Kathy White. I appreciate your comments. Is there any other members from the attendees that have any questions? Not seeing anything, Ms. White Fox?
No, I don't see any hands being raised and I don't see the call-in listener.
Okay. Any members of council have any questions for the proponent?
Don't hear either.
I do, if no one else does.
I do, but I'll wait my turn. Councilor Bulmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. And I'd like to thank the public for their well-informed and insightful comments. It really helps us with our decision. Just for some clarity for myself, I need to get my head around a few details here. I just want to make sure I understand. We're talking the tree plantation and the 3 properties that you're proposing for housing afterwards. I think you partially answered this. Are they all outside the proposed area to be zoned extractive, or are they within the area to be zoned extractive, the 3 housing lots and the tree planting area?
Through the mayor, Councillor Bulmer, if I understand your question correctly, and if I can maybe touch too on one of the comments that was received, The area of the significant woodland is not proposed to be rezoned or added to the aggregate overlay. So it would remain outside of those areas.
Mhm.
The houses that we've shown on that after use plan, that would be located within sort of the setback area along the road. And in terms of the proposed what we call the proposed reforestation or the proposed tree planting, that would occur within the area, the extraction area. So I'm not sure if that helps answer your question, but just I hope that distinction helps clarify things a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, to help, I'm speaking from a planning perspective, and I'm not looking for site plan terms right now. I'm looking for when you say the setback area, are you still proposing that that area is zoned extractive and you'll use it as part of your setback on the site plans? Or are you proposing that it'll be outside of the extractive area and on the site plans? The same thing for the tree planting area. The tree planting area, it will be zoned extractive, will it? And those lots will be zoned extractive? Is that what you're proposing?
Through the mayor, that's correct. So those areas like what I call the setback area alongside Road 25, that's proposed to be rezoned extractive. And part of the reason that that's being proposed is there's berms that are required there. And so typically we would want that included as part of the extraction zoning. The area, the reforestation would also be essentially would be zoned extractive, right? That's an area that will be extracted and then the tree planting will occur there. Typically afterwards, I think the idea of accommodating those, what we call the 3 new houses, at a certain point, once the extraction is completed, the rehabilitation is undertaken and the license is surrendered, those lands would have to be rezoned to something more appropriate, right? I think currently the extractive zone wouldn't just let you build new houses in an extraction zone. So, you know, there are options of having it go back to the agricultural zone that's currently in place.
Understood. And just to clarify, it isn't that I would want it zoned extractive, it's that you would want it zoned extractive. In previous applications, we have on some sites not zoned the areas extractive where it's supposed to be setbacks and berms. We have left those outside of the area that's zoned extractive. But if you're proposing that area be zoned extractive and the tree planting area be zoned extractive, then I have to look at that as being governed entirely by the site plan, and I can't take that into consideration as part of my planning decision, unless you can demonstrate to me what the connection is between the planning, what the plans that you show us as part of the planning process and the Aggregate Resources Act. Is there something in the Aggregate Resources Act that says the site plans you show us as part of the planning process will remain like that and they can't be amended without our approval?
Through the mayor, there is a site plan amendment process under the Aggregate Resource Act. Councillor Bulmer, what I would say is no site plan is ever fixed, right? So when the minister makes a decision to issue a license, the site plan is not necessarily set in stone. Things do change and amendments do occur. And there's a process in which certain amendments then require the township's consultation with the township. Just so I'm clear, I just want to make sure I'm perfectly clear here on the reforestation area. That's an area that will be, the materials will be extracted, and then it's the side slope that gets planted. So if that wasn't placed in an extractive zone, you know, there would be no way of otherwise creating that slope to create the reforested areas. Certainly with the significant woodland, that's going to be left alone. That's not going to be added to the aggregate overlay. That's not going to be zoned extractive. And with respect, I guess, to the site plan too, I would note that in working with the township's peer reviewers and the review agencies, we have shared the site plans with both the township and county to show what changes have been made. I can appreciate the fact of there may be a concern that that's viewed as a provincial document and we can't touch it, but I do want township council, and I hope you know, that you see this in good faith, that CBM does want to work with the township on this in the county, and they have made changes to the plan to address that have been incorporated on the plan that would be submitted to the minister. So I know maybe at this point there's not a provision or a document that says this site plan shall remain for the lifetime of the pit. I don't think we could ever commit to that, but I hope that you can see that we've been trying to work collaboratively with the township and try to maybe look at things a bit differently, specifically with rehabilitation than maybe in previous years.
Absolutely, thank you, and I recognize that, and it has been I've worked with CBM for years, and my challenge is that the reality of the legislation is that these site plans are licensed documents. They're not planning documents. There is no type of site plan amendment that requires municipal sign off. There is nothing that prevents any applicant from submitting a wholly different set of site plans for the license than they show us during the planning process. That's not your fault. That's not our fault. That's the process we're left with. And I try to make decisions based on that reality to help build trust back into the system. And that's why I always look at there is more than one way to achieve what both of us are trying to achieve. And sometimes it's not the Aggregate Resources Act. And that's the kind of open dialogue that we need to maintain through this, because I recognize that our consultants have commented on the site plans as they exist today for the license. But that's only one of an infinite variation of situations that could occur here. And my goal is to try and ensure that our consultants are commenting on what we're actually approving, not what is one of a many possibilities. So I'm trying to avoid asking my consultants to forget the site plans because we can't control depth. Have we considered the maximum depth that's physically possible to dig in this? I mean, that's where we go to. And I'd be looking at alternate ways to achieve. If you want to do a tree planting, there are other ways to achieve that other than having that zoned extractive. If we want to have housing lots left, there are other ways of achieving that than zoning that extractive. They can still be within the licensed areas, but to put any value in those so-called benefits, we have to recognize that those need to be achieved outside the area that's zoned extractive, because once it's zoned extractive, I can't put any weight in it because it's subject to wholly governing by the MNR. And, as you heard from the residents, our faith is significantly shaken with regard to the MNR and their ability to enforce or listen to the comments we make. So that's where I'm coming from. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and through the mayor, sorry if I can, Councillor Bulmer, I would say CBM is more than willing to work with the township on the bylaw. So if I know in the county planning report, there was a discussion about considering some of those items, certainly more than happy to figure out what that would look like, right? To give the township a level of comfort as to what's currently on the table and finding a way to make it work for all parties.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bulmer. Councillor Goyda. Oh, sorry. Maybe you didn't. I'm used to the meeting. Maybe you didn't have comments. Listen to Matthew speak for so long. All right. Well, I wrote down here trust, and I think that's the basis of Councillor Bulmer's concerns is that we've encountered where we've had tree plantings on an adjacent operator, and then they filed a minor amendment to their either site plan, and then they cut all the trees down, and that paved the way to now getting rid of the trees and extracting that gravel. So I echo the comments that Councillor Bulmer mentioned, that I think it's actually fantastic that you have that slide deck in there, and that would be I would love to have a poster child that I could work with you and promote across other municipalities, that here is the end use of aggregate. But the reality is you can have that slide in front of us, and as Councillor Bulmer pointed out, it's all zoned extractive. And as soon as the value of the aggregate becomes worth more than the land or you moving your plant, then there's nothing binding you to those slide decks. So to me, they don't carry any value, other than it would be wonderful for us to be reassured that that's the end solution or not solution, but the end use. Because one of the largest concerns with council here is that aggregate is supposed to be an interim use, but we have pits that have been dormant for getting close to 20 years. They never surrender the license. So we've experienced every workaround, every example of And I'm not, you know, we're playing in the same ball game, and the rules are the problem, right? I'm not super upset that you're taking advantage of the rules, but definitely if there's an opportunity for CBM to work with us and, you know, maybe exclude those components of the homes from the extractive zone, or I looked at those 3 houses and I thought, well, is there an opportunity there for the township or the CBM to provide access for the public, post-extractive, post-rehabilitation, instead of having 3 homes, have 2. And then we can run it, all of us can go around and say, look at this, what we got from, you know, arid extraction in your community. You got access to a lake that you can swim, do these other things. These are important things when there's impacts that, as I spoke before, go decades. So you know, that's the biggest thing for, I think, this council, is that you know, we have concerns with you know, our ability to influence any of it, and that these are planning components, but really it's a licensing component. Once the license is in place, then it's a free-for-all. Question for you: we have brought up concerns with the crossing at concession 2, with, I believe it's one of your pits. The rock trucks drive over it. Is there any willingness in CBM to, you know, make sure that where you're crossing concession 2, to take responsibility? And I understand that you pay a levy, but the levy is on the truck that leaves the processing plant, right? So the aggregate can be in 2 or 3 trucks before it gets to the, you know, the road that we collect the levy on. On concession 2, it's you know, it's unfortunate that it's a mud bath most of the time. My director of public works is constantly trying to fix the road from the rock trucks because they're so heavy. So I'd like some communication from CBM on their commitment. If this pit's going to be another 5-10 years in operation, you know, their commitment to that road crossing, and whether they pave a portion of it to try to get the mud to stay in the pit, or and also the upgrade of the road. What's the significance? I don't know if this is for staff or for you, Neil. What's the significance of adding the proposed lands to the mineral overlay? Why is that important?
Through you, Mayor, I'll start with the road crossing, just because I am aware that CBM has had recent discussions with township staff regarding what we call the PQA/Neubauer crossing, which is probably 500 meters to the east of this crossing. And I know, CBM is part of the meeting here, and without speaking for them, I know there's a willingness to figure that out and find a solution that works. So that the things like the structure of the road, the mud track out, all of those are being addressed, so that there's a feeling of comfort. So I know that there has been a recent meeting with township staff on that. The second thing, that your question about the significance of adding the overlay, there's a portion, there's 2 hectares of the site of what I call the proposed extraction area that's not within the overlay. And so in order to line it up with the amendment of adding this site to what we call the mineral aggregate area, the overlay should be extended to follow that line. So that's sort of why we've added this idea of extending the overlay to the southern limit of the extraction area. The part of the overlay, just I guess a bit of background, that mapping's been based on sort of provincial mapping, right, to identify what we call primary and secondary aggregate deposits. So the deposit in this area extends further south. So, we know there's the material to the west and to the east that go that far south. So it's really, Mr. Mayor, the idea is to make it line up with what we're proposing for the mineral aggregate area designation. So there's one fixed line, not 2 lines on this site. It's a bit of a technical one. And I apologize. It might sound a bit weird, but
no, it's fine. So is there any mineral aggregate resources below the proposed where the 3 homes will be?
Mr. Mayor, through through you, there would be aggregate underneath those, but those are within, those lands wouldn't be able to be extracted because of the 30-meter required setback from the road. So that just, and to be open and upfront on this, the aggregate extends further south, right below the significant woodland. And in that case, there's not an intent here to include that in the aggregate overlay or to rezone it to extractive. That area is going to be left zoned agriculture and left outside of the aggregate overlay. So yes, the aggregate continues. Where those homes are located, they couldn't be extracted because of the requirement to remain at least 30 meters from the road.
But through your application, they will be included in the extractive zone.
Yes, through you, Mayor, correct. They will be, we're willing and hoping to have the discussion on what that bylaw looks like. My experience is typically we include that because there's going to be berms that are going to be needed to be placed there. So we try to line everything up so that any sort of what I call aggregate or extraction related activities are occurring within that extraction zone. Certainly we wouldn't want, I don't think CBM would want to run into an issue where if that land's left in a separate zone and they put material there to build the berms, that then there's a question as to whether they're allowed to do that under the zoning. I think with respect to mitigating noise and ensuring that there's no visual impacts, it's generally understood that berms are an effective way of dealing with that. So I think we would just want to make sure it's not a situation where that type of activity can't occur.
Fair enough. Okay. All right. Well, is there any further comments or questions from council? Is there any further information you want to provide, Mr. DeRuyter?
DeRuyter. The analogy I always use, it's Dutch, but it's like the writer to make it simple. But thank you for the opportunity to speak before you. I just want to quickly touch a bit on the whole trust thing. And I think, I can fully admit here, sitting in front of you today, that a plan that we've shown in a presentation by no means is a legal document, right? But what I hope it conveys is that there's a willingness on the part of CBM to work with the township on this. The concerns that have been heard with respect to sites that are left as water are very apparent to CBM, and CBM having licensed sites and having a processing plant that's supplying high quality materials in the township want to find a way to do their part to help with this. And that's sort of where that idea came up with. And I think this, tonight certainly won't where the discussion ends on this site or other sites. I think there's a willingness to figure out how to come to a compromise. I can appreciate the fact from the township's perspective that there's an area of the township that contains a lot of aggregate and it's been subject to aggregate extraction for several decades. I think recognizing the value of the resource, the importance to the economy, and finding a way though to give something for the township and its future and its current and future residents that makes sense is in everybody's best interest. So I hope that helps with the overall framework and the discussion we've had tonight. And I think certainly CBM wants to continue to have those discussions. So as a closing note, yet thank you for the opportunity to present in front of you, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer the questions.
Well, thank you, Neil. And it's refreshing to see a proposal that, whether it's binding or not. Honestly, I think both the municipality and the industry need a rehabilitation program like this so that we can, promote it to the community and the residents that host these sites. And it's my hope that this comes to fruition as you've presented it mostly today. I understand that there could be variations slightly, but I'll be an optimist on this. And honestly, if it is as presented, the end use, I think that's something that the community could get behind. So hopefully that's where we end up. So thank you again for your time tonight.
Thank you.
All right. I declare this public meeting closed. Council will take no action on the proposals tonight. Staff will be reporting at a later date with a recommendation for council's consideration. If you wish to receive further notification of this proposal, please email or call planning@plissonshaw.ca or by phone at 519-763-1226 extension 4 or contact township staff during regular business hours. Only those persons who leave their names will be provided further notification. If you wish to speak to the proposal when it is brought before council in the future, you must register as a delegation with the township clerk prior to the meeting. And I believe that's the end. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.